All right, thank you. Mr. Stratmone, where do you stand on building or renovating the high school in Greenvale, and how much do you think it will cost?
Well, I'm going to be cautious in sharing the thoughts until we have more community input on that. The high school, as I mentioned, was built in '63, occupied in '64, the graduating class in '65. The systems in that building are old. There are issues of safety. There are issues, and I don't want people to run out here and say this high school is unsafe. But when you have sprinkler systems that have been there for 50 years or more, there's always an opportunity that something may go awry. The heating systems and all of that need a significant upgrade. The other thing is, are they effective in providing the learning for the students? The learning style is much different than when that building was built. And that needs to be modified. And if it can be modified within the same footprint, great. That may not be done. But in the end, this is not a board's decision. This is not an administration decision. This is a community decision. And we need to go back to the taxpayers, share the issues, and get the taxpayer input on this. So, thank you much for that question.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Iverson.
Sure, I'm lucky that I'm last on this one. So I guess it's looking at the anticipated needs, what the cost would be to taxpayers, and then the timing of it. What else are we asking of our community at that time? As Noel described with the high school, it's at what point do we decide that it's no longer strong stewardship and sustainability to continue to put renovation costs into the existing structure for some of the reasons he outlined. As Fritz described, Greenville Park, part of it is thinking about the state and early learning. And we were lucky in Northfield that we could house all our all-day K kids. Not all the districts had that facilities. So if that were to come to pass, we'd have to look for space. And so that's one of the reasons. Fritz also brought up an important point in that there's still confusion in the community. We had, I think I wrote down 584 people at Thought Exchange. Not as many people coming to I think we had 28 different sessions for the community. So I think that as Noel and I think Fritz and my other candidates have described, we would need to go out to the community more and educate the community on what the issues are and then look at some real costs. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll start with you, Ms. Gerwitz. What do you expect to change or do to keep class sizes down without increasing the budget?
Again, I think we would work with the administration on this. They're the ones who are going to be able to have the best sense of the resources that are available and the problems that are there. And the board sort of oversees all this. They're more visionary. They're more representing the community in the school district. But I think a lot of the solutions would come through the superintendent and the administrations, how to deal with that. I know recently the board dealt with adding a new classroom to Sibley to alleviate some large class sizes, and we're successful in that. So I don't have an answer from myself, but I think the answer is just listening to what the administration comes up with and working with them and finding the solutions through them.
Thank you. Mr. Bogat, what do you expect to change or to do to keep class sizes down without increasing the budget?
Yeah, I don't have a pat answer either. The two things that seem very important in the class size conversation are, one, continuing to be very proactive in watching the demographic patterns to make sure that as few surprises happen as possible. Of course, if many people move to town suddenly, that's hard to control for. But even there, we work with the state demographer to try to anticipate things like that. So one is to be proactive. And then two is that class sizes and equity among class sizes and among schools is a community conversation, because anything that you do about class size is automatically complicated and it involves wrenching trade-offs. That one thing that's been discussed at board meetings a lot recently is that equity among class sizes at the high school is largely related to the degree of student choice at the high school. And so it's a community conversation whether you would want to decrease the amount of student choice in order to have class sizes be more even, or whether the choice is important enough to have class sizes be uneven. So an important thing that the board can do is facilitate the community conversation about exactly what the trade-offs are, and then the community gets to weigh in on whether those trade-offs are worth it and how to balance among them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stratmone, what do you expect to change or to do to keep class sizes down without increasing the budget?
Well, my earlier answer would be the umbrella would help some of that, and that's get the $11 million from the state and the federal governments to support education. That would go a long way towards solving a lot of the concerns that we might have about class size, teachers' salaries, and all the rest of it. But I'm going to take a radical approach to your answer, for an answer to that, and I would propose year-round education opportunities. That hasn't come up. And I would like to see year-round educational opportunities, not that everybody would go to school 12 months a year. I don't think that's a doable situation in this community or in a lot of communities. My suggestion is that there would be 3/4 of education opportunities available. And certainly if you spread the student population across all 4 quarters, you'd see a lower class size. There has some other benefits of that, and that would occupy the buildings 12 months a year. They would give the faculties an opportunity to pick and students, to pick the 3/4 that they choose to attend. There may be reasons why they want to be not attending school during the summer, but there may be other reasons why they choose not to attend school in the winter quarter. So that is the opportunity that I think we can have to lower the class size and maintain the budget.
Thank you. Ms. Iverson, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I have it. Thank you. So from a board perspective, so the question was, what do you expect to change or do? So I guess if I were reelected to the board, as a board perspective, we get enrollment reports, and that's one of the ways we can monitor class size and ask questions. As a parent, I've also been able to see that and ask questions. I don't have a great answer other than we need to, as Fritz said, look at what's appropriate. If you have a large instrumental, say orchestra or band, you have a different sort of class size than if you're looking at a lab science. So I think looking at what's appropriate, looking at equity issues across the schools. What I'm really enthused about is that the strategic plan that we're just rolling out, one of the things that came through, the 89 staff people and teachers that were involved, that was an issue that boiled to the top. So I think we're going to have an action team that's going to be looking at that issue, and I'll be really anxious and eager to hear what sort of solutions that they can think about, and as the question said, without increasing our budget. So balancing class size with our resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy, you have 90 seconds.
Okay. A lot of good points have been made and very interesting suggestions, which I think are worth looking at. I think I agree with Fritz that we need to sort of look at the balance between choice and class size, because if you have classes with only 5 students in them that are electives, and then you have core classes that have 40 students in them, then there's kind of an imbalance there which has to be looked at, I think. So setting those priorities and looking at what do all students need, and trying to reduce the class sizes for those core classes. Even though I'm kind of a technology skeptic, I think one thing I would add to this is that with iPads and technology, there is some opportunity to kind of virtually reduce class sizes by individualized instruction using technology. So I think that's something that we need to work on and figure out how we leverage all these iPads in the schools to do what they can do, which is to individualize instruction.
Thank you.
All right, we have 90 seconds to answer this following question.
Bogart, we'll start with you. What issue related to the education system in Northfield concerns you the most?
For sure, what concerns me the most is that the state funding hasn't kept up with inflation since 1991. So from appearances, it seems like Minnesota in the 70s and 80s did such a good job of funding education and making it so equitable that we declared victory and forgot to maintain what we had. And at this point, Minnesota is no longer even in the top third of states for per student funding that were just sort of average in the United States and no longer excellent. So what concerns me the most is difficult to control from the board level, although I go to the legislature every year to lobby for increased and equitable funding, but you can watch the trend line against inflation, and it just trends down and down and down every year since 1991. And at this point, we're something like $1,600 per student in the red compared to what we were spending in 1991.
Thank you. Mr. Stratmon, what issue related to the education system in Northfield concerns you the most?
Sustainable funding. I think it's the umbrella, as I said, for so many things. Education is the pivot that I believe culture and society revolve around. And without funding to properly educate the children, I think we got a serious problem. There was a Chinese philosopher said that if you worry about tomorrow, make a friend. If you worry about next year, plant rice. If you worry about your future, educate your children. And I'd say the most serious issue that we have right now is sustainable funding, so we can continue to educate the children in the way the Northfield District has and should continue.
Thank you. Ms. Iverson, what issue related to the education system in Northfield concerns you the most?
You're probably going to hear a broken record because we're all probably saying the same thing. What would I have to add up to that is that what concerns me is that we're in an election cycle right now, and at the national and at the state level, you rarely hear anything about funding our local schools. I'm encouraged that there's some interest in thinking about higher education funding, but there's no interest right now or focus on what's going on in the schools. And I think it's a national problem, and I think it's certainly, as Fritz outlined, it's been a state problem. And as school board members, I know that we advocate for that, but we have little control over what we're given other than to try to take our resources and use them wisely. So I guess it's raising the consciousness instead of just talking about standardized testing and some of the challenges that has highlighted. I would really like to see the conversation focus on how can we as a community and the community thinking at a statewide level sustain our schools.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy, what issue related to education system in Northfield concerns you the most?
Well, I think we have excellent teachers, we have excellent students, we have an excellent and supportive community. As everyone else has said, I wish that the funders, the state and federal government, were as supportive of education as people in Northfield are. I think an educational issue that we need to address is the opportunity or the achievement gap, making sure that every student in an increasingly diverse community has the opportunities they need. This could be, they're coming from different ethnic, religious, socioeconomic backgrounds, and they all have different goals in life. And I think just that range and the different types of diversity and the different needs of students have to be addressed. And of course, funding helps with that, but I think being able to give individual attention to each student is one of the most important things we can do.
Thank you. Ms. Gerwitz, what issue related to the education system in Northfield concerns you the most?
Well, I'm going to make this unanimous, but I just wanted to say, a few years back, Money Magazine named Northfield as the #1 place to retire to in the country. But we also need to think about one of the reasons why people with families moved to Northfield. Probably the main reason is the school district, and that was one of the reasons we came to Northfield as well. We have a really good school district. We have administration and teachers who are looking into a lot of the educational issues. So we need to make sure that we get the funding to be able to keep moving in the positive directions that the school district and the schools have been moving in. So that state funding, the federal funding is certainly something that we all need to be advocating for, not just the school board, but all of you out there. And the Northfield News, if any articles you can write about it, that would be great. KYMN, we all need to work together to make sure that the other leaders of our state and country understand the importance of funding our schools. Thank you.
Next question, Mr. Stratmon, we'll start with you. Do you feel iPads for every middle and high school student have been a wise investment of taxpayers' money?
Absolutely. There's debate in the community, but probably not debate in most of the learners. I only have to look to my own grandchildren to see how they're communicating one with another. And while I am of a generation that doesn't have an appreciation for the electronics that oftentimes is used, our responsibility as educators is to educate the learners for the future, not to educate them how we learned in the past. And I think electronics is here to stay, and we need to embrace it and use it, and it has a valuable opportunity in the classroom to do so.
All right, thank you. Ms. Iverson, same question to you.
Yes, I guess I would say it has been. What I've seen, the value has been not just in the classroom, but the outside of classroom learning, having two children who had to make the transition to iPads and the changes that they had, that it helped them in terms of how they were learners at home. It changed how I, as a parent, helped them when they're learning, and I think there was sort of a gap or a learning curve for me, and I've heard from other parents in trying to adjust to that, that in some times was painful for us, but I think the value has starting to be seen with that, and as Noel said, it's really getting our students so that they're prepared for the future, and technology and handheld devices are here now, and we need to continue to look for ways to capitalize on the technology that we have for them.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hardy.
Yeah, as some people know, I was the one member of the school board to vote against the iPads, mostly because it was a 3-year-old technology at the time, and I favored a slower rollout, and so that some of the best practices could kind of emerge through kind of a pilot program. But once it became a program adopted by the school board, I was totally on board with it, and I continued to bring concerns and questions, but I think that just makes the program stronger to have people who aren't kind of taking it for granted, but always saying, how can we do this better? I think technology is a powerful tool. I think it can unlock creativity and facilitate communication and collaboration. There are problems with distractibility and, in some cases, even addiction to technology, which are things that we have to deal with. This technology is obviously not going away, so one of the things that the schools can do is teach children how to manage their time with these devices and teach them what's called digital citizenship. So I think it's something that we do have to support and we do need in the schools.
All right. Ms. Gerwitz.
So I'm 100% on board with the iPads. I think they've been a wonderful innovation for our school district. There may have been a few wrinkles that need to be worked out, and I know, Superintendent Hillman, back when he was doing the IT stuff, but was working through those. I attended many of those parent feedback sessions. What I've seen, having a daughter who has an iPad, is she liked to read well enough before, but when she discovered reading on the iPad, it was the medium that she just loved, and her reading really took off. And I've also seen just, technological ability, being able to use those, that really does, the students know how to use technology in ways that parents don't. And also the creativity in the teaching processes. The teachers have come up with different ways to get the information out to the students. So my daughter's had flipped classrooms where, they get the they watch a video at night and then they answer questions during the day with the teacher. So there's been a lot of interesting innovations that have happened. So it's worked out really well. And one of my favorite stories quickly is there's really no such thing as a snow day anymore, because the snow days, what happens is the teachers send out all of the work on the iPads for the students to do. So the students still end up with a few hours of work and don't have that same fun time. So maybe that's a drawback, but it's kind of fun.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bogat.
Yeah, ironically, despite the fact that I'm a software engineer, I was a curmudgeon about the iPads originally because it seemed like they were potentially a distraction from pencil and paper issues that I care about in the schools. But I, over time, have concluded that I was wrong about that. And part of what I think is going on is you see in the newspapers and the business pages that people say that the productivity gains related to the IT revolution have kind of tapered off in the business world, that there was big changes in the 90s and aughts, and that now the productivity gains are kind of done. And what I'm seeing in the Northfield schools is that we're still in the really exciting part of the productivity gains from the iPads. Two of the really interesting things that are happening is that increasingly, rather than using textbooks, teachers are able to select open source curricula, which means what it sounds like it means: A, free, and B, really spot up to the minute and created by peers. So rather than created by textbook consortia, that teachers are creating curricula that they can then share with other teachers around the state with absolutely up-to-date information, and it's very exciting.
Thank you.
Ms. Iverson, we'll turn to you with this one here. Assuming limited opportunities for revenue increases, what resources would you identify to maximize the value of our student education?
Can you repeat that?
Assuming limited
Speak up.
opportunities. Speak up. Sorry.
Speak up, thank you.
Assuming limited opportunities for revenue increases, what resources would you identify to maximize the value of our student education?
Sure. So it's difficult because that's kind of our reality right now, is that we have limited opportunities for revenue. I think I've been happy that the administration, Dr. Hillman, and prior to Dr. Hillman, Dr. Richardson, were always looking for creative ways for us to seek other revenue opportunities. ADSYS was something that came on board that's really been a powerful funding opportunity for us to help our students that are most at need. So I guess as a board, really encouraging administration to look for those creative opportunities. But then the other opportunity, I think, is that Northfield Promise with the community engagement. We're looking at how much do we do in the school day and how much of the learning happens outside of the school day, and what is the role of the community in supporting that learning, whether it's in the evening or the summer, and looking beyond learning happening just in the classroom, but our co-curricular activities. So I guess that's a really, in Northfield, our strongest and what I'm most enthused about opportunity to augment the learning without having to look at that sort of limited revenue piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy, assuming limited opportunities for revenue increases, what resources would you identify to maximize the value of our student education?
Well, one thing that's been really exciting, I think, is that teachers have been able to, with analysis of data and with programs such as, they all have great acronyms like MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, and RTI, response to intervention, that they're able to do things faster and more efficiently. So I think doing the things that teachers have always been doing, but being able to pinpoint problems that individual students have been having and being able to make improvements more quickly and efficiently, I think these kind of programs throughout the school are really an important way of doing that. And I think also, as Ellen said, community involvement. I mean, I think, for example, the community school, of course, there's a cost attached to that because it's grant funded, but I think the volunteer efforts that Fritz has been working on with Accelerate Northfield and after school, I mean, I did an after-school Latin club at Greenville Park Elementary School, so I think getting community members with their expertise to be tutoring or helping out is an important thing that we could be doing.
Thank you. Ms. Gerwitz, assuming limited opportunities for revenue increases, what resources would you identify to maximize the value of our student education?
Well, we're blessed to live in a city that highly values education, with the 2 colleges here, with people who move here because we've had a strong school system. So I would like to just agree with what has gone before and say, I think we need to explore partnerships within the community. There are a lot of very strong partnerships there already. We should keep working with those, improve those, whether there's Torch or Northfield Promise or partnerships with Carleton College and St. Olaf College. We also do have a lot of people who have taught at various levels in the community that may be willing to give their time. And then in general, I think that parents, we should work to engage parents beyond just the teaching part, but there's so much more that volunteers can do to enhance the school district, and we should work to leverage that. So there's a lot of possibilities out there, and it's just working to bring the people in and get as many people engaged in the system as possible.
Mr. Bogat, would you like it repeated?
No, I've got it. Thank you. I want to expand on what others have said. The same habits of mind and practices that make education better, and even if we were in a fully funded and there was more money coming in environment, it would still behoove us to watch the data very carefully and try to keep the number of initiatives down to the ones that were most effective. And you'd want to do that even in a fully funded environment, just to avoid burnout, because people can't concentrate on 15 different priorities all at the same time. But the good news about that is that by having lots of data, only paying attention to the data that really matters and using that to narrow priorities and narrow focus is also positive for making efforts more cost effective. So even though cost effectiveness isn't a good primary goal, it's a side effect of a goal of improving educational efficacy anyway. So the same trends that are helping us for efficacy are also helping us for cost effectiveness.
Thank you. Mr. Stratmo?
Well, as I've said, the opportunities for additional funding are very limited. As I said, the state and federal governments have been very derelict in supporting education per their promises. A group that has not been derelict, however, is the taxpayers of this district. They have done a tremendous job supporting education. The role of education, I think they believe, is pivotal to the success of this community, and they have continued to support education in so many ways, and I'm hesitant to go to the communities for that. But I think we can also sustain our educational programs, because there are so many things in place right now that provide our learners with a top-notch education. And while I'm reticent to say that finances is one of the issues, I've said repeatedly, if we don't have finances, it's going to be hard to sustain it. But I think that the community is going to support it, as they have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got 90 seconds to answer the following question. Mr. Hardy, we'll start with you. What specific suggestions do you have for a successful working relationship with the Northfield business community?
Well, I think one thing we did last year or the year before was we actually joined the Chamber of Commerce. So we've got a representative sitting here on the Chamber board. And I think that the opportunities for internships and for finding out what the business community needs from the schools, what kind of training, what kind of workforce for the future does the Northfield community need. It's interesting to see, for example, students who've gone through the Torch program coming back and working in Northfield in various capacities. And I think getting that sort of value from our graduates is important. So how do we, I guess, assess the needs of the business community and work with them to educate our students to come back and contribute to Northfield in the future?
Thank you. Ms. Gerwitz, what specific suggestions do you have for a successful working relationship with the Northfield business community?
I think communication is the key in making sure that there is a relationship between the schools and the business community. And since I'm sort of new to this whole process, I'm not sure where that stands right now, but certainly making sure that there is a regular channel of communication. I do know as I go about the community, I see many high school students in jobs, and so I agree with what Rob said. Is finding out, are we training the students, are we educating them so that they can fill even these entry-level jobs? I think that would be good feedback we could get from the community. Also, again, with the partnerships with the various businesses, I'm sure some businesses would be more interested in others, but would the businesses be interested in somehow helping us with their expertise? And what would that be? So there seems like there's lots of opportunities there to work together to make Northfield a strong community.
Thank you, Mr. Bogat. What specific suggestions do you have for a successful working relationship with the Northfield business community?
Well, as others have said, the really good news is that I think that that relationship is better than it ever has been and getting better all the time, because it's being moderated both by board representation directly on the chamber and also by Northfield Promise. There's lots of chamber involvement both in the Community Connectedness team and the Career and College Readiness teams for Northfield Promise already. And I know other teams are busily trying to figure out how to extend beyond the nonprofit realm and reach out to the small business community for additional support. And that's going well and going better every day. So I want to thank all of you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Stratmon, what specific suggestions do you have for a successful working relationship with the Northfield business community?
I'd say continuing to build that relationship with the businesses and then engaging the business to share what their needs are, not only in the areas of curriculum and that kind of thing, but also to engage the future students and the future learners, to engage the learners and in ways that they might integrate into their businesses in the future, either as a career after college or out of high school into the working community right away. I think we need the input and we need to build that relationship, and we definitely need the engagement.
Thank you. Ms. Iverson, what specific suggestions do you have for a successful working relationship with the Northfield business community?
Sure. As some of my colleagues up here have mentioned, that it is this is an area where I've seen tremendous growth. Back in January of 2014, it didn't get above zero that day, and we had, I think, 40 people assemble out in Dundas, many business community members with school district and staff and administrators, and that's when it was clear as a board member that the time was right. And it's continued to grow. As Fritz mentioned, the Northfield Promise, the Career and College Readiness Action Team has had a tremendous amount of effort that they put in with at the middle school. They had a wonderful forum for the students to see about vision and what they could attain. In terms of specific suggestions, I guess it's what I would like to see is that we're more mindful of the opportunities. I think we've got this opportunity right now with this collaboration with a board member on the chamber. I know that I serve on the community action with Todd, so we have this relationship. So capitalizing on that, and then an earlier question asked, how would I measure success? In this area, I would think that it's that we immediately think of the opportunities. The businesses start to think about the school and how there could be opportunities, and at the school that we're recognizing that more and more.
Thank you.
Ms. Gerwitz, we'll start with you on this question. As a member of the Northfield School Board, or one to possibly be one. Who do you feel you are accountable to, and how will you ensure that you stay accountable to them?
I see the relationship between the school board and the administration and the staff as more of a team relationship, that the school board is there to help with the larger vision, because sometimes teachers can be very involved in the day-to-day workings, and to help keep the school district moving forward and working with the administration to determine what would be valid ways of examining the success of the school, and working with the teachers and encouraging the teachers to have creative ideas about what they would like to do in the teaching. So I think we're all accountable to each other, where we really serve as a team to provide the best educational opportunities possible for Northfield students.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bogat, same question to you.
There's no one to whom we're not accountable. Northfield, the Northfield schools are such a center of pride for this community that I would say that first and foremost, we're accountable to the whole community, because it's such a source of pride and the community's eyes are on the school so much of the time. And then, of course, very importantly, we're accountable to the taxpayers, because we are we're such an economic engine for the community, and the community has been so generous toward the schools that being responsible stewards of tax money is one of our most important responsibilities.
All right, thank you. Mr. Stratmon, who do you feel you are accountable to, and how will you ensure that you stay accountable to them?
Well, I think we're accountable first to the students, who we have promised an education that will serve them well into their future. Next, I think we're accountable to the taxpayers, that we have been good stewards of the contributions that they had made to support the public education. And then I think we're accountable to the community. And as I've said, I think education is the pivot around which a community revolves. And those are the three areas I think that I need to be accountable. And how do we measure that? I guess we measure it by the reaction that the students have to their education, and the reaction that the community has to the strength of the school systems. And one of the ways that's measured is by the community support and the taxpayer support when we have visits with them regarding future funding.
All right, thank you. Ms. Iverson.
Sure. So like my fellow candidates have said, I think the school board is accountable to the community. And so the community are the students, the parents, the taxpayers, the teachers, the administrators. Julie Pritchard and I have this conversation where we'll say we have to be able to look someone in the eye when we go to the grocery store and they ask us that question. And those are all of those people. And I think so the other second part was, how do you ensure you stay accountable to them? It's when you make those decisions knowing that you're going to be facing them and you can look them in the eye and that you've thought about those things. And one of the things I'm excited about with the strategic plan, this vision statement that we mulled over on Monday night, is it talks about that. There's language about the community, about being financially sustainable, about world-class education, and about every student. And so I think that having that in your head as a school board member places that accountability and staying accountable to the group.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hardy.
Well, obviously, I wouldn't be on the school board now if I hadn't been elected to the position. So the voters of the district and the taxpayers of the district I'm accountable to them. And as everyone has said, it's really everybody, the community, as Ellen said, that includes teachers, students, parents, other community members. Something that people have said to me a lot is the school board needs to remember that the superintendent works for them, they don't work for the superintendent. And I think that's true. I think the superintendent is a very good administrator and comes up with solid recommendations, but he's not the only person that you should be listening to. You need to go out to the community and find out what people's concerns are and do your own homework. So I'm always about every issue, talking to other people and listening to what they have to say and bringing those questions back to the superintendent to make sure that ultimately what we do is going to serve our children best.
All right, thank you.
We'll start with you, Mr. Bogat. What is one issue not being talked about in this race that you feel should be?
I'd like to focus on an issue that is being talked about, but perhaps not with the clarity that I wish it were talked about. One of the largest issues facing the district is indeed changing demographics. But I think that when people imagine changing demographics, they don't imagine the precise situation that's happening in Northfield. One of the biggest things that's changed in Northfield is that these days, if you're a teacher and you have an elementary teacher and you have a 30-person class, there'll be a couple of Latino kids in that class. But the biggest change in demographics is that right around 30% of the class is low income, verging on poverty. And that for that whole cohort, most of which is white, that whole 1/3 of the class in Northfield elementary schools are having a very difficult time reading. So a thing that has changed is that there's much more poverty in Northfield than we think of. That poverty is by and large white, which isn't people's stereotype, and that many teachers are busily trying to change their teaching methods to catch up with that demographic reality, but it's requiring a lot of frantic experimentation, and it's a difficult problem.
Thank you. Mr. Stratmon, what is one issue not being talked about in this race that you feel should be?
I want to answer your first part of your question, an issue not being talked about. I think is late starts. There's some pressure to start school later. And there's a lot of medical research that's gone into that supports that. It has a lot of issues associated with late starts, including parental responsibilities, activities and practices, missed classes for away games or away activities, transportation costs, and all the rest. It isn't being talked about, but it's on the radar, it's on the horizon, and it's going to come up from time to time. And we need to be open to that conversation because there's some medical research that says late starts is the right answer for a lot of reasons. Not without a downside. So I think that's sufficient for my answer.
Thank you. Ms. Iverson?
Sure. So my answer is similar to Fritz in that related to the issue of poverty. I understand why it's probably an issue not being talked about because there's not a concrete plan for how do we address it. Northfield Promise is looking at doing a study of poverty in Northfield, and I think that'll help inform us. But I think what could be talked about in terms of an issue is what sort of choices are we willing to make, and then what are sort of the benefits of those choices. And how I've seen that play out is both my kids went to Greenville Park and had a tremendous education there, and will both tell you that so much of their education goes back to what they encountered at Greenville Park. And I know when you look at test scores and you look at averages, I've heard people say, I don't want to go to Greenville Park because of the averages. And I think that elevating that as an issue, that we're not about averages, that the things that we do for the populations that are most at need help all students, and that it's not about a school, it's about where are the populations, and that we're all together as a community. When we think about every student, what does that mean? What sort of cultural shift does that mean in our schools? So I guess that's an issue that's not being specifically addressed. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy?
Yeah, actually, this is a good question because now with both Fritz's and Ellen's answers, that is being talked about in this campaign. So thanks for that question. And I agree. I think both of my children also went to Greenville Park. I think it's a great school, and I think I've talked to many parents who don't want anything about Greenville to change because they know that being in a diverse community actually is educationally beneficial and students do better in integrated schools. So I think we do, there is a problem when one school has 42% of its students, on free and reduced price lunch, that there's a concentration of poverty in one place. So one thing that and if you look at on the other end of the spectrum, you have Sibley Elementary School, which is bursting at the seams. I don't think you can fit many more students in there. So I think the sort of distribution of the elementary school population is something that needs to be talked about. And this might get into very difficult decisions about redrawing school lines or configuring the elementary school differently. So I guess that's my answer.
Thank you. Ms. Gurwitz.
I agree with what my colleagues have said up here. There certainly income issues are a major thing to look at. But since I've already talked about it, I think I want to throw another issue out, and that is parents. We're not talking about the parents, and I think we do have a pretty involved set of parents, but I think we can always involve parents more. And I think parents are the strength of a school system, and often an unleveraged strength. And I'm not sure what all we do with parents. I know it's more at the elementary level than as kids get older. But I would love to be actually able to engage the parents more in the schools and use them as resources to further strengthen our schools. And I feel an involved parent is not only good for the school, but it's good for the students as well.
Thank you.
All right, candidates, thank you very much for all those great answers to the questions and your patience. We'll start now with wrap-up closing remarks. Mr. Stratmo, we'll start with you. 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
The Northfield Public School System is a fantastic educational community. We're known across, excuse me, we're known across the state and across the country for our successes in many ways, and we're looked to as a role model for those successes. I'm privileged to have been part of that team for a number of years, and we're all in it together, the students, parents, taxpayers, the administration, businesses, community, the citizens of the community, and even our guests that come to the district for the events that we offer. I've said that the systems that we have for public education are like the strands of a strong rope. Individually, they're fragile, but together they're solid and support the education of the children. And that's my role, has been my role, and I hope to be able to continue my role as supporting education in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Iverson, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Sure. Thank you again for hosting this forum and for putting it on camera so that those in the community who might not have been able to rise too early or had places to go for work can stay engaged with the school board issues. I'd like to echo what Noel said in terms of Northfield being having a reputation for high quality education. I know that we've had legislators and different community organizers come down for Northfield Promise and have wanted to meet with board members and district people and members in the community that are doing Northfield Promise. And I think that we're really poised to do some fantastic things. And I guess that's the reason I'm seeking re-election is I'm excited about the opportunities. While we've talked a lot about challenges when we've been sitting up here, I think we're at a place where there's tremendous opportunities with Northfield Promise, with some of the things we're seeing in terms of looking at students' social emotional readiness, career and college readiness, kind of taking on those next challenges. And I think my experience as a board member, my professional experience as an educational evaluator, and my interest in continuing to stay engaged in this process, I would hope to be able to contribute in those areas. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you for this opportunity. When I was elected to the school board in 2012, my own children had graduated already, and I had no personal agenda. I wasn't looking out for my own students. The only thing I was concerned about was ensuring the best education for all of Northfield students. Of course, there were some things that I was especially committed to, like supporting the instrumental music program, and I think I've done that. But in many ways, the high points for me were the times when being on the school board has called me out of my comfort zone. Like the time I went down to Morristown to watch the Clay Target team before voting in favor of approving Clay Target as a varsity sport. That was a long way out of my comfort zone, but it was an opportunity to stretch myself. And it was an opportunity to represent a group whose interests are very different from my own. And for me, that's what it's all about. It's about supporting a diverse population of students from diverse backgrounds with diverse needs, diverse interests, and diverse goals in life, and giving them all what they need to succeed.
Thank you. Ms. Gurwitz, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the Chamber and KYMN and Northfield News for sponsoring this forum and getting the issues out there and to the voters. I think you're playing a very important role in the election process. I would like to say that I don't feel like I'm running against anybody. I think we've had the blessing of having a very strong school board for a number of years that done a good job leading the school district. Instead of running against people, I know it's an election, but I feel like I'm running for myself. This is an opportunity for me to sort of take the next step in my engagement with the community. I've been involved in many ways, and I think this would be a very exciting time to be part of the school board with the new superintendent, with the new strategic plan, with all of these things coming up, that I want to be part of that. And it's actually too bad that you can't take all of us, because we have citizens who are interested and who want to be engaged. And my motto has always been never turn away a volunteer, but that's how the election process works, so a decision has to be made, and I'm having a hard time figuring out who to vote for myself. So I thank you for getting the word out to people, and I encourage everyone to vote.
Thank you. Mr. Bogat, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Yes, well, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. When people walk up to me in town and ask how things are going on the school board, I always light up because, of course, in my time in Northfield, particularly since the start of Northfield Promise, so many different people in the community have come together to set priorities and to set ways of measuring those priorities and to find opportunities for growth. And then I was honored to be appointed to the school board right in time to hire Dr. Hillman as our new superintendent. And then his first action was to create a new strategic action plan, which is very well aligned to what the community had already said were the Northfield Promise priorities. And so I feel like there's enormous momentum in a positive direction, and I'm so excited to have been a part of that, and I hope that I get to see it through. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank each of the candidates for attending today's School Board Candidate Forum, and thank those in the audience for attending. Have a great day, and remember to vote on Tuesday, November 8, 2016. Thank you.